situation along our southern border has grown increasingly untenable. The Tucson border sector just recently lost the dubious distinction of being the most active border patrol sector. The status quo is now a considerable volume of traffic, as well as theft and vandalism and drug smuggling. It's created a situation that is ever more dangerous for Arizona border residents. Never was this more poignant than with the tragic 2010 death of Rob Krentz, a prominent member of the ranching community on the border. He was killed, likely in an incident related to illegal smuggling. I last spoke to Rob's brother, Phil, just this morning. And despite claims that the border is now more secure than ever, Arizona ranchers know quite the opposite. Beyond the border area, Arizona remains a state struggling under the weight of a sizable undocumented population. As I've said before, this situation helps no one. Not those who are undocumented and living in the shadows, not state and local governments who are bearing the burden, not employers who are struggling to find a legal workforce. It is with this backdrop that the Senate moves toward approving legislation that takes dramatic steps in addressing border security. It provides a tough but fair solution for those who are here illegally, and it spurs economic growth by modernizing our legal immigration system. Obviously, this legislation is not without its critics. Opponents will point to the legislative process and claim it was flawed. I would submit that while no process for considerable legislation is perfect, this bill was made available early. It was thoroughly vetted under regular order in the committee. While I share the frustration that there haven't been more amendments considered on the Senate floor, this body has now spent 3 weeks debating the bill on the floor. We've heard that the bill affords too much discretion to the Department of Homeland Security or to the Secretary and does little for border security. The Hoeven-Corker amendment that was adopted by a wide bipartisan majority removes much of that discretion from the Secretary when it comes to border strategy by designing a minimum level of technologies to be deployed per sector. In addition, the Hoeven-Corker amendment dramatically increases the resources to provide a secure border by requiring double the number of Border Patrol agents and 700 miles of fence. These have to be completed before anyone adjusts status. We've heard claims that the bill weakens existing law. To the contrary, this legislation takes credible steps toward implementing an entry-exit system to tell us who has and has not left the country, and makes progress toward achieving the goal of a biometric approach to the system. And at this point, it's difficult to take seriously criticism that the bill does not go far enough with border security. I should point out that the very day that the Hoeven-Corker amendment was filed, a CNN headline read, "4 bodies found in the Arizona desert. 4 more deceased immigrants had been located near Gila Bend." This is an issue that plays for keeps. It's in everyone's interest that we gain control of the border. The unprecedented level of resources this bill provides, coupled with the mandatory employment verification system and guest worker plans to allow for future flows, this is much needed, and it takes the right steps to get us there. As in previous immigration debates, there are those who claim that this legislation is amnesty. To the contrary, this legislation provides for provisional status for those who are already here as a means to bringing undocumented immigrants out of the shadows. It requires them to meet eligibility criteria, pass a background check, make good on any tax liability, pay a fee and a fine. Before anyone can apply for a green card, they'll have to pay an additional fee and a fine, pass another background check, continue paying taxes, learn English and civics, and prove that they have been employed. Even then, there is no less than a 10-year waiting period before anyone can begin to apply. And that can only happen if the border agents have been hired, the border strategy has been deployed, mandatory E-Verify system is being used by all employers, and 700 miles of fence are on the border, and an entry-exit system is implemented for all air and sea ports of entry. Much of the focus of the legislation has been on the border security and legalization provisions. But just as important, are the critical steps included to modernize our legal workforce. The U.S. economy has to stay on the cutting edge of innovation and global competitiveness. When the best and brightest come here to study, we need to allow them to stay. I'm pleased to say that provisions I previously pushed for as part of the Staple Act were included in this legislation, and those with advanced degrees, the so-called STEM fields, will be exempt from caps on green card applications. This bill moves our legal immigration system further toward a merit-based approach, increases the cap on H-1B visas significantly, provides an avenue for foreign-born entrepreneurs, and creates better programs for both agricultural and non-agricultural temporary workers. When asked about the impact of these changes, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry president said, without missing a beat, he said, "These will provide rocket fuel for the economy." The Congressional Budget Office, in different words, said much the same thing. Over the period of the next 10 years, GDP is supposed to increase by 3.3% as a result of this legislation, 5.4% by 2033. This is good legislation. And let me just say, in the few minutes I have left, for me, coming from rural Arizona, there's a personal backdrop for immigration reform. Much of my youth was spent on a 200-acre alfalfa field just north of Snowflake, Arizona, where I grew up. Along with my father and 6 brothers, I planted hay, cut hay, hauled hay, and moved sprinkler pipes, miles of sprinkler pipes. I even lost the end of my right index finger on that alfalfa field. The chores we performed changed with the season, but there was one constant. We worked alongside migrant labor, undocumented migrant labor, largely from Mexico, who worked harder than we did under conditions much more difficult than we endured. Since that time, I have harbored a feeling of admiration and respect for those who have come to risk life and limb and sacrifice so much to provide a better life for themselves and their families. As I explained earlier in my remarks, there are many who are here in an undocumented status that do not fit the sketch that I've just described. It is our lot here in Congress to fashion an agreement that deals with the myriad motives, reasons, intentions, and purposes that have brought people here illegally. Along those lines, Mr. President, let me close by saying a few words about the path to citizenship that's part of this legislation. I recognize there are those who are here who hold the position that no one who has entered this country illegally should ever be able to become a United States citizen. My own feeling is that citizenship should be treasured and valued and possible for those who qualify and are willing to comply with the provisions set forth in this legislation. If someone is going to be here in this country for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, I want them to assimilate. I want them to have the rights and, more importantly, the responsibilities that come with citizenship. Such assimilation is what sets our country apart. It is quintessentially American. It is the right policy.